Just one more time. She loves to sing, she does everything. She loves to make top the world. We all need the clowns.
There are voices that fade with time. And then there are voices that become hauntings. Steve Perry didn't just walk away from a microphone. He walked away from a version of himself that the world refused to let die. Because when you become the voice of a generation, silence stops being absence. It becomes a scandal, a mystery, a betrayal. And for decades, one question has followed him like a shadow. What broke first? His voice, his confidence, or his identity? If you love the hidden stories behind legends, hit like, subscribe, and join RetroWaves. Because this isn't just about music, it's about what fame does to a human soul. In the 1980s, Steve Perry wasn't just a singer, he was a feeling. The second his voice hit the radio, people didn't just recognize it, they surrendered to it. That soaring, aching, impossibly clean sound. It wasn't just talent, it was identity. Journey didn't merely have hits, they had anthems, songs that didn't ask for your attention, they demanded your memory. Open arms, faithfully.
Wondering where I am, lost without.
Separate ways.
Feeling that it's gone. Could change your mind.
And of course, Don't Stop Believin.
Somewhere in the night.
Those songs didn't just climb charts. They moved into people's lives. Weddings, breakups, road trips, funerals. Steve Perry's voice became the soundtrack to moments people never forgot. And that's where the curse begins. Because when a voice becomes that iconic, the world stops seeing the singer as a man. They see him as a monument, a permanent statue made of sound. And the cruelest part? A statue is not allowed to age. So when Steve Perry disappeared, when the greatest voice in rock seemed to vanish into thin air, fans didn't just wonder where he went. They demanded to know why he didn't come back. But maybe the real question was never, why did he stop singing? Maybe it was, what happens when your own voice becomes a ghost voice? A version of you so legendary that even you can't compete with it anymore? Steve Perry's rise wasn't gradual, it was volcanic. When he joined Journey in the late 1970s, the band was shifting, trying to become something bigger, something sharper, something that could cut through the noise of an era exploding with new sounds. And then Steve opened his mouth, and suddenly Journey had a face. Not just a frontman, a voice that could turn stadiums into confession booths. There's a reason people still talk about his vocals like they're supernatural. Because they didn't feel trained, they felt fated. His tone carried ache without weakness, power without strain, romance without cliché. And on stage, that voice didn't just sing, it commanded. But here's the part nobody warns you about. When millions fall in love with your voice, they don't fall in love with your private self. They fall in love with the persona, the polished, high-gloss version of you that lives under the spotlight. That 80s Steve Perry, the hair, the confidence, the emotional, control, the effortless climb into the high notes, that man became a cultural artifact. And slowly, invisibly, Steve Perry stopped being treated like a living person and started being treated like a time capsule. This is the living museum effect, when the world freezes you at your peak and refuses to let you evolve. Every year that passed didn't reduce the expectation, it sharpened it. Because nostalgia doesn't want truth, it wants perfection. It wants the exact same feeling, the exact same sound, forever. And Steve Perry, more than almost any singer of his era, became trapped inside that demand. Because when you are known as the voice, you don't get to have off nights. You don't get to have different eras. You don't get to be human. So the question becomes terrifyingly simple. How do you return to the mic when the mic is a shrine? And what happens when the world doesn't want the real you, only the myth? And if Steve knew he could never sound like the ghost again, would he even want to try? To most fans, singing is just singing, a performance, a job, a gift. But for someone like Steve Perry, the voice wasn't a tool, it was the self. And that's a dangerous thing, because the moment your voice changes, it doesn't feel like aging. It feels like losing a body part. Over time, reports and interviews have made it clear that Steve's relationship with performing wasn't just about technique. It was about pressure, about expectation, about what it meant to step into the spotlight and be asked to resurrect the past. Because imagine this, you're not just returning to sing songs, you're returning to compete with a legend. And the legend is you. That's not a normal comeback, that's psychological warfare. This is where the idea of legacy burden becomes real. Legacy burden is when your greatest success becomes your prison. When your past becomes so loud, it drowns out your present. When your own name becomes heavier than your lungs, and it creates a brutal internal equation. If you come back and sound different, they'll say you've lost it. They'll say the magic is gone. But if you come back and sound the same, they'll demand it forever. Every night, every tour, every year. Either way, you lose something. This is where ego death begins. Not as a trendy phrase, but as a real emotional collapse. Because the ego isn't just arrogance, the ego is identity. It's the story you tell yourself about who you are. And Steve Perry's ego wasn't "I'm famous," it was "I'm the voice." So, if he couldn't be that voice anymore, then who was he? This is why returning wasn't just scary. It was existential. And somewhere along the way, the microphone stopped looking like opportunity and started looking like a courtroom, a place where the past sits in judgment, a place where the audience doesn't listen for beauty. They listen for proof, proof that the ghost still lives. So, was Steve avoiding the mic? Or was he avoiding the moment the world would declare him dead? As the years went on, Steve Perry's absence became more than a break. It became a myth. Fans didn't just miss him. They built theories around him. Some believed it was vocal damage. Others believed it was fear. Others believed it was pride. And yes, over time, public information has pointed to health struggles and personal upheaval as part of his long silence. But here's the deeper truth hiding under all the surface explanations. Even if his voice had been perfectly intact, the mic still would have been terrifying, because the stage wasn't neutral territory anymore. The stage was haunted. Every time Journey played without him, it fueled the legend. Every time Don't Stop Believin got reborn through movies, TV shows, and new generations, it didn't just keep the song alive, it kept the expectation alive, and expectation is a predator. It doesn't care what you've been through. It doesn't care what you've lost. It doesn't care who you are now. It only wants what you were. And for Steve Perry, what he was impossible. That's the part most people don't understand. Steve wasn't running from music. He was running from the role the world wrote for him. Because the public didn't want Steve Perry the man. They wanted Steve Perry the moment. The forever 1981 version, the forever perfect version, the voice with no cracks, no fatigue, no age, no grief, the ghost voice. And when you're expected to become a ghost, the most human thing you can do is refuse. This is what performance trauma can look like. Not a single dramatic event, but a slow erosion. A lifetime of pressure compacted into one unbearable thought. What if I can't be him anymore? And maybe even worse, what if I can, but I don't want to? Because what if returning meant becoming a museum exhibit of your own past? Forever? There's a myth. People love to tell about artists that they're lucky, that performing is easy when you're gifted, that the stage is where they feel most alive. But for some artists, the stage becomes a graveyard of old selves, because every time Steve Perry stepped away, the legend grew bigger, and every year he stayed silent. The ghost got louder. And here's where the mystery sharpens into something almost unbearable. What if Steve Perry didn't just fear coming back and failing? What if he feared coming back and succeeding? Because success would have proven something to the world, that the ghost still lived. And if the ghost still lived, then the world would demand it again, and again, and again. A tour, a reunion, a residency, a never-ending resurrection. And that's the trap. If he sounded different, they'd judge him. If he sounded the same, they'd own him. This is the cruel paradox of iconic fame. Your best version becomes a mask you can never take off. And at some point, Steve Perry had to face a question that most of us will never understand. Is it better to be loved as a legend or to be free as a man? Because maybe silence wasn't weakness. Maybe silence was the only way to protect what was left of him. The part that wasn't a brand, the part that wasn't a demand, the part that didn't belong to anyone else. And that leads us to the most haunting possibility of all. Steve Perry didn't just lose his voice. He lost the person who used to live inside it. And once that person was gone, singing again wasn't a comeback. It was a resurrection. But here's what almost nobody dares to say out loud. Steve wasn't only afraid of failure, he was afraid of success. Because if he stepped back to the mic and the world cheered, if the crowd cried, if the headlines screamed, "He's back," then the ghost would become his prison forever. And Steve Perry would be trapped for the rest of his life as the person he no longer was. So, the real mystery isn't why he stayed silent. The real mystery is, what did Steve Perry know about that microphone that made silence feel like survival? By the time Steve Perry became the missing legend, the story wasn't even his anymore. It belonged to the audience. And audiences don't just miss what they loved, they rewrite it into something sacred. For decades, fans spoke about Steve's voice like it was frozen in crystal, untouchable, eternal, perfect. The kind of voice that didn't age, because people refused to imagine it could. That's the psychological cost of being iconic. You stop being allowed to change. And this is where the villain reveals itself. Not a person, not a bandmate, not a label, not even time. Expectation, because expectation doesn't sound cruel when it's wrapped in love. Fans say things like, "We just want you back. We miss you. You were the best." Journey isn't journey without you. But beneath that, love is a silent demand. Come back and be exactly who you used to be. Not a little older, not a little different, not a little wiser, not a little worn. Exactly the same. That's the living museum effect at full strength, when the world treats you like a permanent exhibit. And for Steve, returning wasn't just stepping into a studio or onto a stage. It meant stepping into a time machine and being told to live there. It meant being compared not to other singers, but to a younger version of himself who no longer existed. And that kind of comparison doesn't just threaten the voice, it threatens the soul. Because if you step back to the mic and the sound isn't identical, the world doesn't hear age, they hear loss. And once a legend is accused of loss, people don't just criticize, they grieve you, they write think pieces, they whisper, "He doesn't have it anymore." They upload clips titled "Sad Decline." They turn you into a tragedy while you're still breathing. So Steve's fear wasn't irrational, it was accurate. And the question becomes brutal. How do you return to the mic when the audience isn't listening for music, but for proof? Here's what most people never understand about singing. Your voice is not a machine. It is flesh, it is breath, it is nerves, it is memory, it is sleep, it is stress, it is grief. And for someone like Steve Perry, someone whose voice was defined by clarity, control, and emotional precision, the smallest change would feel enormous. Because when your gift is perfection, anything less feels like failure. And that's where legacy burden becomes a psychological trap. You don't just worry about whether you can still sing, you worry about what it means if you can't. You worry that the thing people loved most about you, the thing they used to describe you with, is gone. And once that thought takes root, the mic becomes dangerous. Because you're no longer singing songs, you're defending your identity. This is where the metaphor of vocal PTSD starts to make sense. Not as a medical diagnosis, but as an emotional scar. The body remembers pressure, the mind remembers judgment, the heart remembers humiliation. And even if no one has said anything yet, you can already hear what they might say. That's the nightmare. The fear of returning isn't just about critics. It's about the moment you hear your own voice and think, "That's not me." Or worse, "That's me now," and they're going to hate it. And for Steve Perry, the stakes were higher than any normal artist. Because his voice wasn't just good. His voice was the standard. So if he returned and sounded different, it wouldn't be treated like evolution. It would be treated like betrayal, as if aging is a crime, as if being human is unacceptable. And the cruelest part, even if fans wanted to be kind, the internet wouldn't allow it. A single clip could define him forever. A single shaky note could become the headline. A single imperfect moment could be turned into a permanent verdict. He's done. So maybe Steve wasn't afraid of singing. Maybe he was afraid of being recorded, being archived, being judged by strangers who weren't even there for the magic, only for the collapse. And if your legacy is your crown, what happens when it starts to feel like a guillotine? There's a strange kind of courage in disappearing, because disappearing means you let the world misunderstand you. You let people fill in the blanks with whatever story comforts them. You let them blame you, question you, mock you, romanticize you, and you say nothing. That is not weakness, that is restraint. Because Steve Perry could have done what so many legends do. A comeback tour, a farewell tour, a one last time, a greatest hits cash-in, a residency where nostalgia pays the bills. But that would have meant accepting the deal. And the deal was simple: become your past, sing the old songs, wear the old identity, smile through the comparisons, perform the ghost. But what if Steve understood something deeper than most artists ever do? What if he understood that music isn't just sound, it's truth? And if the truth inside him had changed, then forcing the old sound would have made him a fake version of himself. This is the part that hurts. Sometimes silence isn't abandonment. Sometimes silence is self-preservation. Sometimes it's dignity. Because Steve didn't abandon music. He protected the most human part of it. He protected the part that wasn't for sale. He protected the part that wasn't required to satisfy strangers. And maybe that's the real reason he didn't return for so long. Not because he didn't love singing, but because he loved it too much to let it become a parody. Because once you turn your gift into a museum show, you don't just lose your voice, you lose your meaning. That's the ego death. Not the death of fame, but the death of the false self, the stage persona, the 80s icon, the legend. And when that persona dies, the world panics because the world wants resurrection. But Steve Perry, quietly, seemed to choose something else, a private life over a public ghost. So, if silence protected him, what exactly was it protecting him from? At some point, the story flips, and you realize Steve Perry wasn't hiding from the audience. He was hiding from the version of himself the audience kept demanding. The ghost voice, the forever young voice, the voice that existed in people's memories more than it existed in reality. And this is where the emotional truth becomes unavoidable. Steve Perry didn't just lose years, he lost a self. And when you lose a self, you grieve it like a death. You don't casually step back into it. You don't put it on like a jacket. You don't walk onto a stage and pretend the last decades didn't happen. Because the moment you do, you're not performing music anymore. You're performing nostalgia. And nostalgia is merciless. It doesn't clap for who you are now. It claps for the illusion that time didn't win. So here's the turning point, the moment the audience finally understands the real villain. It was never Steve. It was never the band. It was never even the voice. It was the expectation that he should be immortal, that he should be frozen at his peak, that he should resurrect the dead version of himself on demand. And once you see that, the whole story changes. Because suddenly, Steve's silence doesn't look like quitting. It looks like refusing to be exploited by his own legend. It looks like a man protecting his dignity from a world that would happily consume it. And that leads directly into the emotional peak, because sooner or later, Steve had to face the ghost. Imagine standing alone in a room where your own voice is everywhere. Old recordings, old concerts, old interviews, old praise. A younger you, stronger, brighter, fearless, singing in a way that feels like it came from another lifetime. And then you look in the mirror and you realize something terrifying. That person is dead. Not in the literal sense, but in the identity sense. The era is gone. The body is older. The life has changed. The pain has accumulated. And the man in the mirror is not the myth. He's a human being. So, what does it take to walk back into a studio after that? What does it take to sing again when you know the world will compare every note to a ghost? It takes something deeper than courage. It takes surrender, because you can't win against your past. You can only make peace with it. And Steve's real battle wasn't with the microphone. It was with the temptation to prove himself, to chase the old perfection, to chase the old applause, to chase the old identity. And that chase is endless. That chase destroys people. That chase turns art into punishment. So maybe Steve's greatest moment wasn't a high note. Maybe it was the moment he stopped trying to resurrect the ghost. The moment he accepted, I don't have to be him. And in that acceptance, the legend becomes human again. So why did Steve Perry choose silence? Because silence protected him from becoming a fake version of himself. Silence protected him from the humiliation of being judged for aging. Silence protected him from the endless demand to perform the past. Silence protected him from the trap of success, because success would have chained him to the ghost forever. And most of all, silence protected the purity of what his voice meant. Because when you sing from a place that isn't true anymore, you don't just disappoint the audience, you betray yourself. And Steve Perry seemed to understand something most people learn too late. Your gift is not just what you can do. Your gift is who you are when you do it. And if that inner truth changes, then forcing the old sound becomes a kind of emotional violence. So he stepped away, not because he didn't care, but because he cared too much. This is the truth line that reframes everything. Steve wasn't hiding, he was surviving. Surviving the weight of being iconic. Surviving the pressure of being frozen in time. Surviving the legacy burden. Surviving the ghost. If this story hit you, if you've ever felt trapped by who people expect you to be, subscribe to RetroWaves. Because we don't just tell stories about legends, we tell stories about the humans inside them. And maybe that's the real lesson Steve Perry left behind. Sometimes the bravest act isn't singing. Sometimes the bravest act is refusing to perform your past. Even when the whole world begs you to bring the ghost back to life,